Hi there. I'm at the Kitchener Market today to give you a quick tour of the community fridge. The fridge and pantry are open and available 24/7. Anyone can donate or use items here as needed, and there are some volunteers who check in on the fridge a few times daily to help keep it clean and organized, adding supplies as they're able. Nexus has connected with the organizers of the community fridge, and we have plans to support their work. If you're joining us in person on Sundays at the Conrad Center, you're invited to bring items on any Sunday, and we'll donate those to the community fridge. If you're not joining us in person yet, you're welcome to donate funds to Nexus, as we will be purchasing food and supplies regularly. We're also looking for families and individuals who are interested in taking our donations and dropping them off here after the service each Sunday. I'll have more details about the items we need for donations and how to sign up to deliver the donations we receive. There will be updates in the weekly and on our Nexus Updates Facebook page. You can always email me as well if you have questions or would like to know more.
Top of the morning to you, Nexus. What do you say? What do you be? Here we are again, another Sunday morning together. Thanks for joining us. And I am looking forward to this morning. We're getting back into Revelation. Just quick dip our toes in for 3 weeks. We're in week 2 here. Then we'll be back out on to other things. But glad you are with us this morning. Thank you, everyone, as well, for your continued prayers and support for Kyle and Amanda. That's great to see of our community, and we are certainly thinking about them and praying for them. So thanks for that. In the book of Revelation, okay, we've jumped in this, and last week we left off talking about how the book of Revelation is the story, right, of this cosmic battle between two forces, a lamb who is Jesus and a beast, which is Rome or empire. And while we just dipped our toe in the cosmic drama of it, we stopped, of course, before witnessing the actual battle play out. But if the story of Revelation is a battle, well, what does that look like? I don't know about you, but I remember back in the day, I read kind of books like these. They were exciting to me. I read this one by Charles Dyer, The Rise of Babylon. Now, I believe I've purged it from my library since back in the day. But within its pages, Charles Dyer, he seemed to have this whole Revelation thing figured out. And I was startled while reading this book to realize, according to him, that Saddam Hussein was rebuilding the city of Babylon, and top secret plans they were, of course. And with this intelligence, Dyer had speculated that the world's final days were upon us. Once that city was complete, once construction was done, the stage would be set for Armageddon, the battle to end all battles. And so he weaved in and out of Revelation, claiming the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are on their way. And once Babylon is rebuilt, the end of the world, the armies of the world would soon converge on this battlefield called Armageddon, and it would be a final showdown with Jesus. It was riveting reading. But of course, in hindsight, I believe it's all a bunch of hogwash. But if we're going to talk about Revelation, we've got to go to these wild passages that have led some people to believe there's going to be a very gory, brutal battle coming sometime in the future. So let's get to the heart of the seeming violence in the book, this battle. And even the most unfamiliar folk with Revelation, even those who hardly know anything, are probably very familiar with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and the idea of the battle of Armageddon. And it's true, these 2 images play a role in this cosmic battle. So I want to head to these 2 scenes, jump in, and see where we land this morning. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with a voice of thunder, "Come!" I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow. A crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. And when he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature call out, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another. And he was given a great sword. And when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature call out, "Come!" And I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hands, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay. But do not damage the olive oil and the wine." And when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature call out, "Come!" I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider name was Death, and Hades followed him. They were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. Whoa, 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 eh? I mean, lots of crazy imagery here. Who are these riders? What are they? Well, let's go quickly through the white horse. This one is to me the most interesting because there's actually a bit of debate here. Some people see Jesus in the white horse, and there'll be a reason for that later. But of course, this rider on the white horse comes to conquer and conquest. And so, but some people see, what do you do with a bow? You stretch out your arms and crowns. So is this Jesus? Now, there's a whole other train of thought that's like, no. This is in line with all the other riders we're about to see. And this is the face of empire. This is the urge, the compulsion for empires to conquer and conquest and rule the world, shape history in their image, right? Now, of course, the other 3 riders are far less difficult to sort of pick out. Not actually people, which should be obvious, I hope, but the red horse is what? War. The rider takes away peace from the earth, causes humans to kill one another. The rider holds a sword. The empires of the world, John the Revelator is saying, are the cause of war and humans killing each other. And then we've got the black horse, which is famine, right? Now remember, Egypt is experiencing great famine in the 70s. There's a global supply chain crisis with food. And so you've got food prices skyrocketing, which is why you have that person crying out, right, about how much it's going to cost a day's pay for barley and wheat. So famine and food inequity is taking people's lives, again, pointing towards empire and what it does. And then we've got the green horse of death. It's pretty obvious. It's followed by Hades. It's the realm of the dead. And in this case, death is associated with what? Pestilence, plagues, and wild animals. So death by nature, climate change, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. And of course, what John is doing is creatively giving us a picture of the world we still live in today, a world occupied by these forces which make life difficult, brings a lot of suffering. And so this is a word and image to the early Christians, sort of capturing what it looks like, what it feels like to live in this world. And so you've got that image there, but let's skip ahead because later in the book, again, so many crazy images. We've got 7 bulls of the lamb's wrath, which of course should come with a certain amount of irony, a lamb with wrath. I mean, really. But as each of these 7 bulls are poured out, right? There's all sorts of allusions going on and references. I don't have time to point them all out, but these 7 bulls, they're poured out. They mimic, they call back Egypt and crossing the Red Sea and leaving Egypt and the plagues that had been put on Egypt, right? So there's a whole throwback here to the liberation of God's people from tyranny under Pharaoh, under Egypt. But in the midst of that scene, we're given this glimpse of the world ready to go to war. The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw 3 impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Now, in case you didn't believe me last week about crazy imagery, we're in the thick of it now. We're deep in it. I mean, John paints this just wild imagery. 3 evil spirits like frogs coming out of the mouths of a dragon, a beast, and a false prophet, right? Rome, Caesar, imperial propaganda. It forms like this unholy trinity, you could say. And what it does is it seduces the world's empires to Armageddon. But of course, so many people have seen this as a one-time future event. But is that what John is really getting at? Well, I think John is again speaking of the nature of the world. The unholy trinity is always seducing armies to the world of Armageddon, always seducing the great empires to the battlefield of Armageddon. But Armageddon could also be Normandy or Waterloo or Flanders Fields or Gettysburg or Hiroshima or Stalingrad or the jungles of Vietnam or maybe even Ukraine. And by evoking Armageddon, what John is doing is he's calling to mind for his readers an area, a specific location that had been repeatedly devastated by war. And so he imagines these demonic spirits gathering the armies of the world to a place called Armageddon. It's a Hebrew word meaning Valley of Megiddo. And today it's a World Heritage Site, one of the most visited archaeological sites in all of Israel. And it rises 200 feet above the Jezreel Valley. So it's this artificial mound. And it's this artificial mound because it's the result of the city that was there being destroyed and rebuilt 26 times. 26 times. Why is that? Well, the fertile valley made Megiddo, this area, it was a desirable location for an ancient city. But unfortunately, Jezreel Valley was also located in, you could say, the geography of war. It was situated between the great Assyrian and Babylonian empires in the north, of course, and of course the great empire of Egypt to the south. And so Megiddo found itself over the generations as this raging battlefield time and time and time again. And that their place in history is that this thing had been destroyed 26 times in war, makes Armageddon not some future event, but a apt, very apt symbol of endless war. And so Armageddon is not prediction of some future war, but a symbol of humanity's propensity to get caught in the cycle of endless wars. And for John's readers, this would have been immediately recognizable. It would have evoked for them the image of a battlefield. It would be much the same way as if I talked about Juno Beach, right? To Canadians, Juno Beach conjures up images of war. And of course, there's even more going on here. What is happening in Megiddo, the Valley of Megiddo, around 70 AD? What was happening there before, during, and after Jerusalem was ransacked and completely destroyed, which was the sort of event of the time, right? Well, as it turns out, I think this is interesting. Before and after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, the imperial, how do I say this, Legio Sexta Ferrata, which means Sixth Ironclad Legion, they were encamped in the valley. So this Roman legion is encamped there before and after. Of course, during the siege, they were in Jerusalem, but this is their camping ground there, their staging ground, their outpost. And this legion that was there was known as Fidelis et Constans, which means faithful and steadfast. And so everyone would have known the legion that was stationed there at the time. This would have been common knowledge. And as we're about to see, John the Revelator, he's about to give a very subtle nod, a little tip of the hat, you could say, a sly little wink to this legion that was stationed there. And so the long anticipated battle of Revelation begins in earnest in chapter 19. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. John kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, says that the rider on this horse is called not faithful and steadfast, faithful and true. And it's a kind of playfulness on John's part because he's implying the motto of this Roman imperial legion. And it's something that would just be so easily recognizable by people living in the Roman Empire. But of course, that's completely missed by us today. But the scene continues this way. With justice, he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. And coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has written this name, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried out in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, "Come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small." Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. And with these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. Whoa, whoa, vivid imagery here, like birds eating flesh. Oh my goodness, it's really potent language, powerful language, imagery of war and bizarre imagery, no less. And so here we seem to have Jesus on a white horse leading an army of flying white horses, and he's wearing a robe that's drenched in blood. And he's got a sword protruding from his mouth. And he does battle with the armies and empires of the world and seems to make quick work of them in rather grotesque fashion. What is John communicating to us with his creative symbols? Well, one of my greatest fears, and even dipping my toes into Revelation, is that symbolic language like this will leave us thinking, you know what, there's just nothing here for us. You might be thinking, Brad, I don't know. This is beyond me. This stuff is all just too weird. I don't get it. And yet, I want to contend with you that you do get it. We get it. We know how to read symbolism, or at least we know how to spot symbolism. We know how to read the bigger story beyond what is right in front of us. And I think the best way to showcase this is really just to point out imagery within marketing, things that we see every day. Point out marketing where brands are selling a bigger story than what is immediately obvious than what is right in front of us. So here's what I want to do, just have a little fun. In these examples, some print marketing, okay, notice the story behind the image. Let's start with this one. I love it. This is from the World Wildlife Federation. Take a look at this image. Ooh, fascinating. Very interesting. This idea, right, that there's some sort of Jenga game going on in the world. But imagine somebody looked at this and said to you, "Oh my goodness, that's cool. I didn't know WWF is selling very cool looking Jenga games." We would probably call that person maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed. What is WWF really saying here? Pull out one part of an ecosystem and the whole thing falls. Our delicate ecosystem is like a game of Jenga. On the surface, it looks like a game of Jenga, but there's a bigger story, a bigger message here. When one piece is removed, the whole structure comes tumbling down. Or think about that. This one to me is kind of cruel. This is from Acne's Sealing Gel. And notice what we're looking at here. This is a fascinating image, right? Apparently what's being sold is a gel that can get rid of acne, but what is the bigger story here? And of course, marketers have stoked fear in consumers by exaggerating the negative consequences of not using their process, right? But in the ad depicted above, we're given an image of what? The consequences of not using a certain product not only leaves you with acne, but the lack of a social life, the lack of romance, love, relationships. It's playing on our deepest fears. It's not just telling us a story about how this cream will help your acne. It's telling you what will happen, the dire consequences if you don't use it. And there in the bottom, shame no more. It's playing a story of shame. Or think about this ad from IKEA, right? This is so fascinating. 3 words and a very effective image are all that's needed to send a crystal clear message to us, right? The viewer immediately receives the message that, hey, this isn't just an apartment complex. No, IKEA, the real story they're telling, is the place you go to set yourself apart. Or I love this one from LG. Oh, this is playing on something deep. Take a look at this. We're looking at some sort of home-bought vacuum cleaner, right? And what they're selling us on the surface is, a vacuum cleaner, a robot vacuum cleaner, but they're selling us a bigger story underneath it, because what exactly is the text there is a common argument that couples have out all the time. And so what they're saying is not just, hey, you should buy this, they're telling a deeper story. This can clean your floor, yes, but it can also eliminate unnecessary fights over domestic tasks. Our product will bring you peace in your home. I really like this one from McDonald's, right? Where what is McDonald's selling here? I mean, on the surface, you could say, well, it seems like they're selling French fries. But the fries are symbolically fashioned into a symbol that only those of us in the last, 10, 20 years would understand or get. It's a Wi-Fi signal. McDonald's isn't selling fries here. There's a deeper story. Hey, McDonald's is a place you can come, connect to Wi-Fi, be connected to the world, to community, and maybe have a bite to eat while you're there. Or this one, oh boy, this is telling a story. This is from Nicole, right? And these are toilet seat sanitizers, right? But they're not just selling us that, they're selling us a story. They're asking us to imagine the rest, right? There's this picture of dozens of strangers all around this toilet seat. It's an image, it's a symbol of something much bigger than just a sanitizer. What it's saying is they're selling us a story of disgust. Do you want to sit on a toilet that's had that kind of history? Clever marketing. There's a story beneath the story. Or consider this is a great one from Colgate Floss, right? Now, no one could be faulted, right, for thinking this was an ad for Kiwis, but the image, it's selling a deeper story. Those pesky moments in life where you get a seed caught in your teeth with no way out. Colgate isn't just selling floss, it's selling a story, a memory of discomfort, maybe social embarrassment, and subtly pointing to the solution. We know how to read symbolism. We know how to interpret symbolism because we see it all the time in marketing and advertising. Subtle cues give us a lens to interpret the deeper story of an image or a text, right? We know to look beyond what is easily obvious or what is right in front of us. And something similar is at work here in Revelation. Okay, there seems to be a massive, ugly battle of some kind in front of me, but we know this is symbolism language here. This is a whole genre. We need to look deeper to the story beneath it. Is John actually selling us a warrior Jesus? Is John actually trying to sell Braveheart Jesus here, a God with a nastier side than we imagined? No, I think clearly not. It says, Eugene Peterson says, for a time, writ large in the headlines, war is perceived as an evil and there are prayers for peace, but not for long. For it is quickly glamorized as patriotic or rationalized as just. But war is a red horse, bloody and cruel, making life miserable and horrid. It is the action of power-hungry persons. It is the delusion of insane pride. It is an expression of greed gone crazy. The perennial ruse is to glorify war so that we accept it as a proper means of achieving goals. But it is evil, period. It is opposed by Christ. Christ does not sit on the red horse ever. War is an evil, and God, through Jesus, will never use war as a means of achieving God's purposes or intentions for the world. And that's why we have to call back the riders on the horse, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The war horse is the red horse, and Jesus never sits on that. I mean, we see this throughout the Gospels. Jesus on Palm Sunday rides into Jerusalem, refusing the war horse and coming in on a donkey. It was a politically subversive statement. Who Jesus was, what he was about, was never about war. Or consider the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I mean, does Jesus in the end here in Revelation simply kind of shrug his shoulders and say, I guess I was wrong about all that peace stuff and loving your enemies stuff? Come on, if you're going to buy into a Jesus warrior in Revelation, you essentially have to throw out the Gospels. So what are these symbols actually pointing to? How does Jesus wage war in this cosmic opera of grand symbolism? Quite simply this way: Jesus goes to battle with empire through his death, resurrection, and by the truth of his words and what he speaks. Sacrifice and truth. And you know, there are times, the more I study Revelation in courses and whatnot, that I do sometimes think that John the Revelator may be asking too much of us. Asking too much of us modern readers. I mean, maybe it's just too much. It's too dense. It's too symbolic. It's too rooted in the history of the first century and the Hebrew people history to the point, no wonder it's received wrongly. But I firmly believe that John is like, are you kidding me? I just assumed, maybe I shouldn't do that, assumed that we would keep in mind what he reveals to us about the slain lamb in Revelation 5. He just assumes we'll keep in mind the Jesus of the Gospels. Jesus is ever and always the slaughtered lamb. And John stresses that Jesus wages war how? Not through weapons, not through violence, but through his own sacrifice and by truth. He is depicted here as the white rider wearing a robe drenched in blood before the battle begins. This is key. Why would Jesus show up drenched in blood? The war hasn't begun. Because Jesus' robe is soaked in his own blood, the blood from the cross. Jesus wages war by self-sacrifice. John knows and assumes we know that Jesus isn't going to conquer the Roman legions by killing them. John knows that Jesus conquers the legions in the same way he conquered the demonic legion in Mark 5. And this is an interesting parallel story to me. This is what it says. When the demoniac saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. I mean, this is a fantastic story. What is the demon worried about? You're going to torture us? Worried about this sort of God that might torture people? And what happens? How does Jesus defeat the legion? With his words, with truth. There's no weapons. There's no torture. There's no violence here. This is how Jesus wages war on the empires of cruelty and greed and violence in our world. Not by taking up arms, but by sacrifice and truth. What are we to make of Armageddon, this idea? Well, I would say this in conclusion. Armageddon is always a looming possibility in our world. It always is. And we're hearing about it right now in Ukraine. Will there be war? Will there not be war? And while it's always a possibility, it's never an inevitability. To be seduced, you could say, by the spirits of the apocalypse and the beast with the frogs coming out of its mouth, This is always the temptation for humanity, to always find themselves on another bloody battlefield. Armageddon isn't the end of war. Armageddon is a picture of endless war. And if we try to end war by more wars, if we try to defeat our enemies by using the same weapons they've used, we always just end up with more war. I mean, remember that World War I was dubbed the war to end all wars, and 17 million people were sacrificed on the altar of war. And what did we get not even 30 years later but World War II, which left 60 million people dead? To me, this is the relevance of the book of Revelation, because John presents his readers with our choices. You can either listen to the frogs and keep doing the same thing, keep ending up in more war, more violence, more power plays. You can follow the seductive spirit of the frogs or follow the way of the Lamb. And if we follow the way of the frogs, the beast, we end up in Armageddon. And this is the wrath of God. This is the wrath of God, that God will permit us, if we insist, to keep playing out history and ending up back in violence and power plays. But there's another choice, and that's to follow the way of the Lamb. You know, I have heard it said by some that Jesus came the first time as a lamb, but the second time he's coming back as a lion. And what a lot of people mean by this is that the nonviolent Jesus of the Gospels is going to somehow mutate into what they imagine to be this hyper-violent Jesus of Revelation. And what this does is it gives us a schizophrenic Jesus. It assumes that after a long trajectory in Scripture, moving away from violence, culminating in Jesus renouncing violence, calling us to love our enemies, that somehow the Bible in its final pages, abandons a vision of peace and nonviolence as ultimately unworkable, not tenable. And in this reading of Scripture, for those who hold to it, they have to come to terms with the fact that the Gospels are then useless. The way of peace and love that Jesus preached during his lifetime and endorsed in his death ultimately loses to the way of power and war and violence. If we literalize the militant message of Revelation, we can't help but arrive at this conclusion. In the end, even Jesus gives up on love and resorts to violence. And if that's the case, the Sermon on the Mount means nothing. The way of Jesus means nothing. It was all for naught. And so the onus, to me, is on those who hold to a kind of violent Jesus. They need to prove themselves, because the God that we see revealed in Jesus on the cross through Jesus' life looks nothing like that. So we can only conclude this book of symbols is pointing to something deeper, and something deeper it is. Jesus wages war, not by the weapons of war, but by sacrifice and truth. Friends, thanks for your time, your energy this morning. I appreciate you being with us. Only one more week in Revelation, so if you're like, this is too crazy, just one more week, and we're getting to the end of the story, so that will be fun. But one more week there, and then we're on to other things. And Lent is coming up. I hope you'll start thinking about Lent, right? This season of anticipation leading up to Easter. So that's still to come. For now, for this week, go in peace.